Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another bookish conversation with a children's literature author. This week, I'm talking with Molly Harris about her debut picture book, The Big Squeeze. This book is about a little sponge with a big job. She washes and mops and scrubs all away the messes in the kitchen. But what happens when the mess gets too big and she just can't clean anymore? This is a book for kids, but it's also a book for me, for adults with a powerful message inside. It's been so influential to my own life since reading it, and I cannot wait to talk to the author about it. So let's get to it. Molly, welcome to KidLit Love. I am so excited you're here and to talk to you about this beautiful book today.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. It's great to be here.
Oh, I adored your book. I just have to
So
say, I adored your book. It was a needed book for me in so
yeah,
many different
I get that a
wonderful,
lot.
fun ways. Yeah, I imagine that you do. And so I feel like I'm lucky to get to talk to you about where it came from and the book and the themes and all of it. But before we actually get to the book, this is your debut picture book, which
Yes,
congratulations.
thank
It's
you.
so
Thank you very much.
exciting. Since you are likely new to listeners, since this is your first children's literature picture book, I would love for you to talk a little bit about you and just introduce yourself to us and tell us about your journey to children's literature.
Sure. Okay. So my name is Molly, and these days I live in Ireland with my family, but I'm originally from Massachusetts, and was definitely, as I think a lot of authors are, a big reader when I was growing up. I was also a really big writer, always writing stories. That was like a very early sign. And I think, you ask kids what do they want to be when they grow up, and I would be one of the kind of perhaps rare ones. You might say veterinarian for a while, but it doesn't maybe pan out. But it was writer from the start, and that's always felt like what's the truest to me. So as life went on, I was the girl in AP English class. The like just the everybody sort of knew that that is what I like to do. And when it kind of started to leave high school, go into college, continued it, studied English as my major. But then when it came to creative writing, I was finding that was starting to wane a bit. A lot of focus on academics. I don't know if anybody remembers this. At the time, there was a website called fictionpress.com. Did you ever hear that one?
No.
So it was similar to fanfiction .net, which was also out at the time, except that like it was original works, but it wasn't based on any sort of existing fandom or anything. It was your own stories, and you just put it out there for free. Now that I think back, I'm like, what are you doing? But it was a simpler time in the missing time on the internet. So that's sort of where I was starting to practice more like writing, more novel length stories. And but I kind of noticed, like, even though I was like a very proud writer as a little kid, I was getting a little more self-conscious about it as I was older. And it was sort of this thing that I sort of privately did. And then I graduated college, had to get a job. And just I am like a technical writer by trade, so I always try to keep writer in the title, but the creative side has definitely, or had definitely, waned a lot. And I would, I fiction press is long gone at this point, and so then it just became like, I don't know, just writing in my free time. I'm not going to share it with anyone. God forbid somebody reads what I write. So embarrassing. I was starting to
Yeah.
um, feel self conscious about it. Um, and then I don't know. I just reached a turning point where I went. Work is good, but there's something missing, and I miss doing that. And I feel like that was so part of my identity for so long. And it's how would anybody know that about me anymore? And so it was around the time I was turning 30, and I was like, right, I want to, 5-year plan. I want to be published some in the next 5 years. And I kind of had to think about what do I want to write. And I decided I think children's books is what I'd like to write because it meant so much to me when I was younger. And I just felt like that's just a perfect opportunity to get somebody excited about storytelling and immersing yourself in something. But I didn't know like what genre I was going to do or anything. So I started in on, I thought I was a young adult at the time. We come to learn it's more of a middle grade. Like I was really not in it at all. I didn't know really the genres, like the breakdown of KidLit as well. I just sort of knew what I'd read growing up. And so it took a lot of like diving back in and understanding like where is the sort of literature landscape now, what's hot. And I started in on writing a middle grade, and in that process I ended up having a baby. It was the start of the pandemic, and I was now reading a lot of picture books and, stocking his little library, and everybody's turning out around me. This is like in the first 6 months of the pandemic, and it was just a very, very intense time for everybody. And that kind of coupled with the timing of I know I want to write something. And this just felt like such a moment where ideas were starting to come to me. I was starting to re-immerse myself in kids' books. It really, the two things kind of really came together. And I realized, I think I'm going to start with a picture book.
It sounds like all the stars aligned.
Yeah, yeah,
Back to what you loved as a kid, you were giving yourself permission to kind of revisit that, and new mom, new picture books, new books, and oh, by the way, it's a pandemic, which is just mixing everything together, and you
totally.
seem to be
It was
yeah.
a heightened time, right? Like everything was just, I mean, we were just parents, not just parents, but like our big thing was, well, we just had a baby and the village isn't there. And so gosh, there were so many people who are suddenly losing their jobs, losing their lives, losing their family, um, suddenly keeping their jobs, but also somehow have to be teachers at the same time, but never taught, second grade before, and now they have to teach their kids at home and do the. I mean, it was a mess. I think we probably put a lot of it behind us, like
Yeah.
necessarily because it was very traumatic. But in the time, I remember speaking to my husband about it at the time, and we were just at this kind of like really frustrated moment. And just all like we're like sponges, just soaking everything up. And we can't go for walks, we can't see our friends, we can't see our families, we can't go to a restaurant. You can't do anything. You have to wear a mask when you walk outside. We have no outlets. And so we're soaking it all up and we can't wring ourselves out. It's no wonder we're terrible at our jobs and terrible at communicating and terrible at, having bad sleep and all this. And it was just a metaphor that I was using in the moment. And I literally went, "Oh, that's a pretty good one. I'm
That's
gonna go write that down." That was truly the moment because I was already starting to think about what do I want to write.
yeah.
Um, And it just that image came into my mind, and I was like, "I think that pretty much communicates how we're feeling,
Yes. Yes, this
but
is
in a visual way."
yeah. This is why I feel like I'm so lucky to talk to authors on this podcast because I love knowing the moment the book just comes to you, right? The
Yeah,
idea comes to you that and I, reading it and we'll explain what the book is about in a moment,
sure.
but reading it, you have an I everybody will relate to this book. Every single human, especially an adult,
Yeah,
will relate to this book, and knowing that that's where the idea came from, it makes so much sense, and I love how it was a combination of you allowing yourself to go back to that kind of writing that you loved while being in this time and just having your real life give you that spark that
yeah,
then just kind of giving back to everybody who now reads the book. I love knowing that moment. Thank you for just explaining it.
yeah, of course. It sticks out in my mind very much.
So let's give an overview. I think readers can probably know a little bit of what's coming based on
Mhm.
the way our conversation has went, but the book is called The Big Squeeze. And I would love for you to, now that we know a bit of the inspiration behind it, can you give us a little synopsis of it for those that haven't
Yeah,
read
of
it yet?
course. Well, it begins with this perfect, neat little sponge. She's in the kitchen,
And she's
very
adorable.
very adorable. Kudos to Allison Hawkins, the illustrator, who I had no notes on this bunch when she sent me the character sketch. I was like, "That's it. That's exactly who." She had the pink shoes and everything. All I had written was a little yellow sponge, and she just knocked it out of the park. Um, so she's in the kitchen, and she loves to do what sponges do, which is clean things up. And you see her cleaning up after a toaster. You see her sweeping up after the oh my god, blanking right now. Let me open it up. Um, the toaster. Oh, the knife.
Yep.
There's knife chopping vegetables. There's milk splashing on the counter.
I love when the blender explodes.
And then yeah, that's it. That so like a bunch of she's cleaning up after everybody else. Everybody else is making a mess and she's taking on the responsibility of looking up after them. But so much keeps happening, things start clogging up, breaking down, a blender explodes, and she can't literally can't absorb anymore. And she's totally bloated and full of all this milk and crumbs and stuff. And as she continues to keep working through it, she's making it worse. She's getting, crap all over the counter, and she's kind of become useless. Her purpose is gone. And she has a bit of a wake up call in terms of what do you have to do when you end up in these moments? And through the help of a bunch of other cleaning supplies, gets that big squeeze from the title, and they wring her out, they wash her up. Cute scene of her kind of like getting pampered, because what else would you do with a sponge, right?
Right?
And she gets all sudsy and cute, very adorable illustration, of course.
Sunglasses on.
Yeah, and she learns to relax, which take breaks, and I think that's why I think it's at that line that most adults who hear it when I'm reading it, or messages that I got are, oh, whoa, I needed that message.
Mm.
So yeah, that's the synopsis.
Yeah, and listeners everywhere are just in their cars or they're walking their dog or they're washing their dishes maybe as they're listening and they're all just nodding their heads. They're going, "Uh-huh. Yep, okay, yep, that is me." And so I want to point out that I feel like there are two layers going on in your story. You have one that is just a fun, delightful, whimsical story that kids are going to lean into because I mean, the sponge is real and the blender's real and the faucet has eyeballs and it is just
Hmm.
a very wonderful kid-friendly story that they are
And it
going.
gets yucky. It gets like
Yes.
that's I've found in doing readings, kids really love to do the big. At one point, the sponge kind of goes into it. kind of sound, and
Yes.
because she's covered in smoothie, and I get the kids to do that with me. And that is a very satisfying part for everybody. So yeah, I think kids definitely like the kitchen uh, mayhem
Yes.
at the start.
It's fun. And because of those illustrations, you are just there, right? I didn't realize that a sponge could be so animated or that a faucet and a toaster could have such emotions on their face, but as you said, the illustrations are just gorgeous and they convey this emotional and whimsical kind of scene in just your typical kitchen. And so I
Yeah,
feel like you've got that one layer that is just a really fun, wonderful story experience. But then you have that second layer where adults are nodding their head, and there is such a big life lesson here of taking care of yourself
yeah,
and not doing too much and not pushing when it doesn't feel good, because then in the end, you are good for nobody. It's
right,
especially yourself. So you've got these two layers that combined, it appeals to kids for sure. It appeals to adults. And there's such a good lesson in there that if kids can even walk away with that idea that it's okay to take care of me at
right.
a young age instead of what happens to most adults, which is what happens to the sponge where she felt heavy, weighed down, and totally useless and basically
Yep,
is sobbing in her soap dish. And I thought,
yeah,
"Oh my gosh, how many times did we do that,
yeah,
at the time of
totally.
life?" Such a beautiful lesson to bring to such a whimsical, funny story too.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I'm interested now that it's out, to see sort of at what age kids start to kind of get that second layer of the message, because I think so far my experience has been like they, yes, they love the silly sponge stuff, and and the big squeeze is a helping hand from others. It's also a hug for yourself, which that's the metaphor of taking care of yourself. And so I think some kids are taking away is like, if somebody's feeling upset, you give them a big hug. And I'm like, yes, totally. Great lesson to take away. But of course, it's not just about, oh, a spa day will fix everything. Like that's what works for that sponge. But I think you have to figure out, my hope is that, you know, parents, teachers, the adults reading this and the kids will start to think about, what does the big squeeze look like in my own life? Is it like taking time off work or meeting with friends or going away for a weekend, or just I just want to be able to read before I go to bed, whatever it is. Like it's just going to be different for every single person. And then for kids, I mean, kids get overwhelmed too. Um, but I think that starts a little bit later. Like, I've been reading to a lot of like 4 or 5 year olds, and stuff. So Um, but that's not to say I think it still could be an applicable issue. But like once the homework starts kicking in, all the activities that they go through, and I'm hoping that imagery will stay with them, um, because they are wonderful illustrations. And I always described it when I've gotten overwhelmed. I feel like I'm absorbing too much.
Mhm.
That's kind of always what I've said. Like I'm just taking it all in, and yeah, that can be really challenging. So I do hope also, like, I think kids witness us when we're overwhelmed. So even if it's not something that they personally experience, they can see it, you know,
Mhm.
like mommy's taking on too much today. She
Yes.
needs a big squeeze. And it might be as simple as, I'm going to give her a hug right now. Um, yeah, but I do hope that that imagery will stay with them, through others.
Yeah. Well, and as an adult, I need those images. I need those metaphors too, because it those lessons of taking care of yourself, of giving yourself a squeeze, of helping yourself out, we can say them and we know how important they are, but putting them into action is harder. And just that analogy of that big squeeze of whether, it is to twin rubber gloves coming to save the day and squeeze you, or it's someone, in your real actual life that you can reach out to for help. I think on the flip side of that, what this book also shows is that we could actually be the squeeze for someone else too. It's taking care of
Yes.
ourselves, it's asking for help, but then also, being on the lookout for others who might
Recognizing
need
the
that same.
symptoms,
Yeah.
totally recognizing the symptoms in somebody else. What is that going to look like? I mean, you know, for me, I know myself when it's getting too much, like my body starts sending me signs, like I'm
Yes.
not sleeping as well, I start to get heartburn, like, various things will kind of flare up. Um, my son is very attuned to feelings. He's 4 years old. He's like the second my voice starts to get a little serious, and like I'm starting to lose my patience. Come on, let's get in the car. I pause and go, did you get a good sleep last night? He's like, seems like maybe you're getting a little stressed. Everything okay? And he knows, well, a good night's sleep is probably going to help you. It's
Yeah.
so funny. And no, as a matter of fact, no. Um, it always makes me laugh, like that he cares, and so it's important to look out for people you care about, and yeah, be there to help them.
Yeah.
Which I think that's like an evergreen lesson. And when I pitched this originally to agents, my kind of hook was you can't pour from an empty cup and you can't clean with a dirty sponge. Uh, so like we know the concept already. Uh, that's on signs around homes and stuff. Like you have to put your own oxygen mask on before you can help somebody else. Like I think we all do know that concept. It's just putting it into practice is
Yeah.
the really hard part.
Yeah. And for listeners of this podcast, we're talking about picture books. So people who are reading picture books with young children, they are busy parents. They are busy caregivers. They are busy educators, busy librarians who need this message the most, I would say. So I think it's just such a perfect coincidence that the book they're going to pick up to engage their readers in this wonderful whimsical story might be the very book they need as well.
Which, as a parent, reading a lot of books all the time, you want, I think, one that you also can
Yes.
to when you're going to read something a lot. It's good to have something. I like closing it and being like, like that resonated with me too.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I always enjoy that feeling.
Well, since I have read this, I've lost count actually of how many people I have personally
Oh my gosh.
texted or tagged online and social media saying, "You need this book. You need to read this book. Oh, by the way, you have to read this book." So one of the things that I do, I've actually started it in the pandemic. I used to be a person that chose a one word theme for the year.
Yes.
Everybody tends to choose their one word to guide their year. And I used to do that very faithfully until 2020 because my word,
Mhm.
didn't hold up come March of 2020.
Was that socialize?
Remember what it was. I just know that it didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Started in early 2020. I switched from a word of the year to a word of the month because I felt like a month was a smaller amount of time that I could wrap my head around it. It could change based as the world was changing and we were changing. And since then, it's really stuck. I love choosing a one word theme to guide my month. And for me, that means reading and writing and learning and kind of bringing it into existence in my own life. And so, Squeeze, because of you, because of this book, was a recent one word theme for
That's
me
so sweet.
in my
I
own
love that.
life. Squeeze. I made this social media graphic of just like this big
I
squeeze.
saw that. I was really
Yeah.
curious how you applied that.
Well, in my I applied it in my own life and in my community. So in my other podcast called Get Literate, it's a bunch of adults who just want to read and write their way to a better life. And so there is a whole group of us who join my one word theme kind of idea And we spent the month thinking about squeezing. So, squeeze as self-care. What do we need to let go of? What do we need to get rid of? Who can help us? How can we delegate? And then also, how can we be the squeeze for someone
Mhm.
else? Who are the people we want to hold close? What are the things that matter? Are they getting pushed out of the way of a dirty sponge kind of thing? We just really embraced that metaphor
Cute.
and had a whole month of reading things that we loved. We did some personal kind of development books, and I know for me that was the month that I enrolled in my yoga teacher training that I got brave enough
Oh, wow.
for the first time. Like your book is a domino effect
Oh
of
my
goodness.
gosh.
Yeah.
That's incredible to hear.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure you knew that because it
Thank you for
really
sharing that.
is. This is a book that's impossible to read and not push in someone else's hands because it's for kids, it's for adults, it's so needed, and that cute little sponge, you just don't wanna get out of your.
I know, she's so sweet.
She is, and I do wanna say too, because listeners know I love this, and we talked about it before we hit record, I just adore when I could take the sleeve
Oh,
off
yeah.
of the book and see a different image on that hardcover. And when you do that, so the cover of the Big Squeeze is the sponge in all its wonderful yellow, squeaky clean, pink shoed glory on a clean soap dish. But when you open it up to the cover side, you see the sponge at her worst, where she's just
Yes.
taken on everything and cannot possibly do anything else. And again, thinking of how well Allison brought these images to life, you literally can feel the
Oh, yeah.
sadness and the heartache and the frustration and maybe even a little shame tinged in there of the sponge. But then when you flip to the back, we've got, the end of the sponge, which is she's back to feeling great. Her feet are up and she's relaxing in her
Yeah.
sponge dish. So
It's so cute. You know how that ended up happening, the under the jacket thing? Because I'm a debut author, this was really my first experience with everything, and I've been, asking I'm naive on certain things, and, I had been given the jacket art to review, which is what you see, and I was like, "Oh, it's perfect." Um, what's gonna be underneath? Is it the same or is it different? And my editor, was like, "Usually it's the same, but now I'm wondering, maybe it would be fun to make it different." And that like, it just came from me being like, "Cool, so what does this apply to?" Like, I don't totally know how this all goes, like, and she was like, "Yeah, maybe we could make it, dirty and clean," and that's totally where it came from, so that's a very cute little hidden touch in there.
I love that. I love how it's just an innocent question and turned
Yeah.
into just this wonderful little, like, Easter egg underneath the
Yeah, publishing, I've found, like, a lot of it is, I think especially when you're new, you're kind of just like going where you're led. And I've found I have a wonderful editor at HarperCollins, Luana Hori, and she's just very open to um, my questions, my suggestions, and sometimes the answer is going to be no, we're going to need to do it this way, but there's always an explanation. Other times I'm like, you think we could, in fairness now, like I didn't have hardly anything to say about these illustrations. I mean, they were just perfect. Really, really, like she nailed it. I didn't have any feedback to give on how cute the sponge is with the pink shoes. The dirty sponge, green with the piece of macaroni in its head. That's genius. Like that's her. Um, it's more like, oh, what about the placement of this word, or will we change this text? I found it's worth asking. There's no kind of harm in asking, like, "Well, could we do it this way?" And the answer might be no, but that's been really cool because you feel as an author, a lot of the work that you do happens before you even get involved with an editor, and then it can feel a little bit out of your hands for like years. I mean, I wrote this in 2020, it came out in 2024. So for years, it's sort of out of your hand. But yeah, that was a pleasant surprise just to realize I can still have, you know, I still have a voice here, and yeah, I mean, they've just been wonderful.
And so now with your debut under your belt,
Yeah.
now you can move forward into the next ones. Do you have something that you could give us a sneak peek into?
Yeah, yeah. So the next one has been announced. It's called Werby, and the I'm the writer, and the illustrator is Jacob Suva. And um, Werby is about well, Werby is inspired by my children. Most of the things that I'm writing are very much inspired by sort of what we're living through. I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. It's kind of the perfect sort of ages for writing picture books, really. And what we're living through and what we've gone through the last couple of years has just been sleeplessness. And again, I know, gosh, how many parents will relate to this. Um, Getting out of bed, getting up too early, not wanting to go to bed. And there's just loads of books on this subject. But my son at the time was just very, very into robots. And so I'm trying to communicate to him one night, you got it, buddy, you gotta get to bed. Think about a robot. A robot's gotta charge its batteries, right? Otherwise it's gonna run out. And the next day it's not gonna work. And it was again one of those moments of, hey, that's not bad. Is there something like that out there? And I couldn't find anything. And it's great if you can find sort of a gap in the market of like that's sort of a little metaphor nobody's used before for the sleep um, issue that we all go through at various stages. So Werby is a robot who is very he loves school. He goes to a robot school with lots of other robots and they learn all sorts of things. But one of the classes they do it's I'm kind of imagining it like a gym class where they do bot battles. A little bit like, you know, like a Rock'em Sock'em Robot type of like knock your block off. They have to invent little contraptions and try to like kind of beat each other. And he loves it so much. So it's very much like clang, clang, bang, bang, you know, lots of action. And he's so excited. He doesn't charge himself. He doesn't go into his bed, which is like a charging pad. Um, he won't plug himself in because he's too excited. And you see his battery level on his body like go down really low until the next day he starts to malfunction. And, you know, disaster ensues as it does when you don't get a proper night's sleep. As I mentioned earlier, that my son knows the lesson pretty clearly. You don't get a lot of sleep, you start to use your crankier voice the next day. So, yeah. Anyway, that's the kind of summary of Werby. We're at the stage right now where Jacob has shown me some character sketches, and it's just that's going to be so fun you know, to see what aesthetic is he going to bring to it because he uses a lot of textures and kind of an interesting color combinations, very, very colorful palettes, but like kind of. I'm not very good at describing illustrations. I think though, just check out his work, Jacob Zuba. Very beautiful color combinations and textures. And I think it'll be a really cute industrial look this time. You know, in contrast to the squeaky cleanness of the kitchen. Um, Very excited to see Worky and his world come to life.
Well, and it sounds like you're giving us another metaphor slash analogy to take care of ourselves in another
Right.
way. It's like a beautiful
Yeah, that's true. That's
connection.
true. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think yeah, that must be my that's gonna maybe be the running thread of all
Your
my
thing.
stories. Yeah, yeah. Look after yourself, people.
Yeah, well, what a beautiful message to send a reader.
Sure.
It's ideal. Well, I can't wait. I can't wait for that to come out. Did you tell us an expected date? How long might we have to
I
wait?
know it's winter 2026. I
Okay.
don't think we have a proper release date yet.
Okay. That's good enough for me to look forward to. That's a So where can listeners find out more about you if they want to keep up to date with what's going on in your world, know when your books are getting released? What's the
Sure.
best place to find you online?
I'm on Instagram and uh, Twitter, which I'll just forever call Twitter. Um,
Me too.
Molly H Books is the handle on those. And then my website is mollyharrisbooks.com.
Okay. So I'll make sure to put links to both of those handles, to your website, and of course, to the big squeeze so that readers, listeners can click on it really easily and just get this book in their hands. Listeners, you need it. Every human all needs this book and will likely like just want to squeeze it at the I forget
Yeah.
you can't see me, just give myself a little squeeze. That's what I was doing, listeners, for in the moment. Thank you so much, Molly, for coming on to the
No, thank you so
podcast.
much.
It was a wonderful conversation. I loved it.
Thank you. Me too. It was really, really great to be here.
And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of KidLit Love, and I will see you inside the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.